Working the night shift has a very different kind of silence. With fewer people around, the stillness of late hours can feel unsettling, making every sound stand out. Tonight, I'll be sharing 5 creepy, true night shift horror stories you shouldn't hear alone. Story 1. The Hospital Elevator. I used to work the night shift at a mid-sized hospital in the Midwest. It was hard work, but the eerie part wasn't the patients. It was the silence of the empty halls. Around 2 a.m., I was making my usual check on the 3rd floor. I had to take the elevator down to the basement for supplies. I pressed the button, and the heavy doors slid open. But something felt wrong. The floor indicator said the elevator hadn't moved in hours, yet the doors opened instantly, like it had been waiting for me. As I stepped in, I noticed the lights flickering slightly, not unusual in an older hospital. I pressed the button for the basement, and the elevator began its slow descent. But then, halfway down, the elevator stopped with a jolt. The lights went out for a few seconds, leaving me in pitch-black silence. When the emergency light finally flickered on, I noticed something horrifying. There were now wet footprints on the floor of the elevator. Bare feet. They started at the corner of the car and led right up to where I was standing. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone get in. Then I heard slow breathing from behind me. The elevator suddenly jolted again and dropped the rest of the way. When the doors slid open at the basement, the footprints stopped, as if whoever was in there never left. To this day, I refuse to take the elevator alone at night. Story 2. The Gas Station on Highway 12. A few years ago, I worked at a small gas station on Highway 12. We stayed open 24 hours, and I usually worked the graveyard shift by myself. One night around 3 a.m., a man came in wearing a gray hoodie pulled over his head. He didn't grab any snacks or drinks, just walked slowly through the aisles. I greeted him, but he didn't respond. Finally, he walked up to the counter, but instead of speaking, he just stared at me. His hood was low, but I could see he was smiling faintly. Not a friendly smile, though. The kind of smile that feels deliberate. After about 30 seconds of silence, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here so late." I nervously responded, "Well, it's my job." But he didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he turned and walked out. No purchase, nothing. I brushed it off until about 20 minutes later when I looked up at the security camera screen. On one of the outdoor cameras, pointed at the back of the building, I saw the same hooded man standing completely still in the darkness. He wasn't moving, just watching. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. The strange part was, when they checked the security footage later, every camera showed him, except for the back one. That one had no sign of anyone there, even though I had watched it live. I quit a month later, and that store is now abandoned. Story 3. Library Stacks. This story comes from my time as a security guard at a university library. The place was open 24 hours during exam week, and my job was to walk the halls, checking the study areas. The library had multiple levels, but the creepiest was the basement, the stacks of bookshelves packed so tightly you could barely turn around. The aisles went on longer than you'd expect, and if someone was back there, you wouldn't know until you were almost face to face. One night I heard the sound of books falling. It came from deep in the basement. When I arrived, I saw a single book lying in the middle of the floor. Its pages were torn, like someone had tried to rip it in half. I picked it up and put it back. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Another book crashing. I followed the sound farther into the maze of shelves. When I rounded the corner, every single book on the right side had been pushed off the shelves and was lying perfectly flat on the ground, spine up. That would have taken hours for a person to do, and I hadn't heard footsteps or anyone leave. The library was otherwise silent. The scariest part was when I turned around to leave. On the floor behind me, on the dusty cement, I saw footprints, small, barefoot footprints, leading directly behind me as if someone had been following the entire time. I don't think I ever walked through that basement again without fear of what might be hiding in those stacks. Story 4. The Motel Caller. Back in 2016, I worked at a budget roadside motel. Usually, nights were uneventful. Half the rooms would be empty, and I'd just sit at the front desk. But one night, a call came through the motel's front desk line. I answered, and there was a pause. Then, a man's voice said, "Room 6, send her out." Confused, I asked what he meant. He repeated himself, angrier this time. Send her out of room 6. Then the line went dead. Room 6 that night was empty. Nobody had checked in. I walked down the hallway toward it just to be sure. The curtains were drawn, but when I touched the doorknob, it was ice cold, almost freezing. Back at the desk, the phone rang again. Same caller ID line. I picked up, and this time the voice whispered, "Do not open the door." Then silence. Out of curiosity, I checked the motel's old records the next day. Years earlier, a woman had been murdered in room 6. She was never found until, well, let's just say it became local legend. I still don't understand who called or why, but I'll never forget that whisper warning me. Story 5. Factory Security. My last story happened when I worked security at an industrial factory. The plant shut down at night, so it was just me walking the empty, echoing halls. One night during rounds, I heard footsteps upstairs. At first, I thought it was a worker who stayed late, but when I shouted up, there was no reply. The lights upstairs flickered strangely, creating long shadows across the steel beams. I climbed the steps, heart pounding. Halfway up, I heard something dragging, like chains scraping across the concrete floor. When I reached the top level, I saw an open door to one of the storage rooms. Inside, the lights were off, but I could hear breathing, deep, heavy, ragged breaths. I pulled out my flashlight and aimed it inside. The beam caught what looked like a person crouched in the corner, facing the wall. Their back was hunched, shoulders twitching. I stepped back quickly and called out. The figure turned its head slightly, just enough for me to see pale skin and eyes that glowed in the light. Then the door swung shut in front of me with enough force to shake the floor. When I finally opened it again, the room was empty. Dust on the floor showed no footprints. I quit that job the very next morning. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.